Thank you so much for being here in episode one. Today, obviously, we're going to be talking about, as the title suggests, sales disruption, how selling has changed, and what it means for you. But before we get in there, I thought I would just share a little bit of context about where this podcast came from, what you can sort of expect from us throughout this podcast, and basically why we're here. And it ultimately ties into how sales, I believe, has changed quite substantially just in the last maybe couple of years, even the last 6 months, the way that we're seeing buyer and consumer behavior as business owners, as coaches, as consultants shift has been really fast. And it's been really interesting to try and keep up as a business owner, as a marketer. And you may have even noticed this yourself, where trying to get people to pay for services has been tougher than it ever has been before. And it's quite interesting because on some level, we see people in business that are absolutely crushing, making millions of dollars a month, etc. I don't know if your feed is filled with that, but mine is too. And on the other end, we have, people that are really struggling to get the line across. And I think, this is one of the reasons why I was thinking about starting a podcast like this. And I'll get into what we're going to cover in our podcast, but it's the observing of how human behavior has changed quite dramatically, especially in the consulting space, the entrepreneurial space, etc. And we can even look at people like Alex Hormozy and his $100 million launch in order to see that play out on an even larger level. So let's just get in really quickly. What can you expect from your podcast? Well, if you're like me, I tend to, at the end of my day, sometimes flick on YouTube, or I'll jump into a podcast, or I'll just be listening to something in the background just because I want to learn a new idea. I find that whenever I get a new idea and I sit in it and it feels valid and I mull it over, that it tends to show up in my coaching at some point. Like I'll internalize this idea, I'll think about it, I'll hear it, and then randomly in my coaching session, this piece of content that seemed relevant will just come into my session, and it'll be the perfect analogy to help my client get through whatever they're getting through. And so the way I want to see this podcast is I want to go beyond the step by step, here's 7 tips too. And I want to focus more on more philosophical concepts and also blend that with my history as a breakthrough executive coach as well. So if you didn't know, I actually have a long background in life coaching, executive coaching, NLP. If you brought the Playbook, or if you don't know what the Playbook is, that's where a lot of my expertise came from. I was you could call me a life coach. I prefer student of human behavior, because I think life coaches get a really bad rap, where I was really, really dedicated to understanding the patterns of human behavior. It's really what drove me there. And I think this unique blend of my history as a sort of a human behavior coach. I was certified in something called extended disc profiling. My background as a life coach, blending that with sales is what's created this really unique perspective that I think is actually quite difficult to get across in an email. So you'll send an email, but then it feels a little bit impersonal. And so this podcast, what you're listening to, I kind of hope that these are I don't know if you have that experience where you're sitting down and you've just got your meal, right? And maybe you're alone for whatever reason at nighttime, or you're having a snack, or you're having a coffee. You just want something to tune into, right? That should be easy listening, easy to consume. You don't have to commit to a whole hour. Could just put it on double speed because the person speaks too slow. You know what I mean? That pocket of time. I want you to be able to flick open the app, jump in, click this, and go, yeah, cool. That was interesting. That changed the way that I thought. So as much as this is a sales podcast, this is also a human behavior podcast. It's also a philosophy podcast. It's also an observing patterns in people in the macro sort of situation that's playing out. And I guess just a space for us to connect and to get to know each other, for you to ask questions and that kind of thing, which brings us back to the core premise of how sales has changed and, why some businesses are killing it and why others are not. I would largely say it's to do with trust and relationship. And I think the thing that we saw with Alex Hormozy is he had just generated so much goodwill, far out 3 years, ever since when he launched his last book, and he did it all for free. I don't know if you remember, that specific launch. Everyone was shocked. and they didn't quite understand why. But if you look back now, he launched that book for free to generate goodwill for the, $100 million close that he did in his last launch, which I just, I think that's really rare. And I think the lessons that we can take away from that is that relationship currency was so high that it just made it a complete no-brainer. People almost felt like they owed him money. People spending $250,000 getting a ridiculous amount of books. And if we think about how the prospects have shifted at the moment, I don't know if you've experienced this, but nearly every prospect that I speak to has already brought something high ticket, and they've either had a positive experience or they've had a really negative experience. And this is really interesting. I can't remember exactly where I heard this, but they were talking about how at some point, the market becomes saturated when the people that you're selling to have already brought someone else's product. And we're starting to see less and less of the new people into the industry, where people that, they haven't ever bought anything high ticket before or anything really expensive before. And so you're coming up against like people that have already seriously been burnt for in the past. And I think this is this big wave that has sort of crashed. I noticed it shift around 2020 when, 2019, my wife and I were traveling the world as digital nomads, just launching things online through social media and that kind of thing. And then it was just selling, like people were just throwing money at the wall. And I think it's largely because they had never had a bad experience, right? And for most salaried people, they don't have multiple $10,000, $20,000 investments in them. So if they make one negative investment, that's $20,000, it's not necessarily for them as renewable as it would be for a business owner who has the ability to regenerate that income. It's not a capped income. So I think this is one of the things that we've seen kind of squeeze the market. And also it's damaged the trust, where nearly everyone that you're talking to has probably seen it all, heard it all, felt it all, which is why I also believe that those old tactics are falling by the wayside. So I don't know if you remember this, but there was for a while, this massive, it was a thing where it was like, hey, you can get this free $5,000 consult with our strategy guide, but there's only 3 available today. Or like the webinars that are made to feel live, but they're not. And it's like, at some point, people used to think, oh, wow, this webinar is running every 5 minutes. I better get in and get my spot. But like attendance rates to those webinars have plummeted. They've dropped in half. Ad costs across the board have doubled. Just in the last 6 months in my business, the ad costs have doubled. And so it's really interesting seeing this almost like desensitization to marketing message. And it begs the question of like, well, how do we cut through then? And I think one of the things that we need to start with is we need to look at sales from a being perspective and from a relational perspective. I've been on YouTube a couple of times. I've been watching, a few of the trainers, the most successful ones and the sort of underground ones. And it's almost like we're selling like children in a sense. I don't mean that in a condescending way, but we're selling in a childish way where these trainings are designed to, to wordplay somebody into making a different decision. And the one I always come back to that I think is really funny is like the handling the partner objection, where like if I'm going to go buy something that's a significant investment from $5,000 to $10,000, the first call I'll jump on, I'll, get all the details on the due diligence, and then I'll go and sit down with my wife and we'll plan it, we'll figure it out, make sure it all works, that kind of thing. Not because I need her permission, but because I respect her and we make decisions together, as a team. But a lot of the training that we see is like, if you do that, then, that's bad. They use that cheesy, heavy is the crown. It's this metaphor. If you haven't had the pleasure of hearing it, basically what they say to you is like, have you heard of that saying, heavy is the crown? Like, yeah, what do you think that means? Well, basically it means the crown is heavy on the person that has the responsibility. So do you really want to give that responsibility to your wife? It's kind of gross. I mean, I personally find it really gross. Maybe it works for you. So the other thing is like, imagine someone telling me that I shouldn't talk to my wife about something. It just, do you know what I mean? Like that kind of old school selling just feels so strange in today's world. And I'd say, truth be told, like it never really worked. It was more tolerated, right? Like we just tolerated the kind of ickiness that we needed to tolerate in order to make the sales happen. And now I think people's tolerance has just fallen off a cliff. Like we're not tolerant for that kind of stuff anymore. So I guess wrapping this all up, what we can see is that the brands that are being really successful at the moment are focused on relationship currency. And what that means is they are focusing on building brand, they're focusing on building trust, they're appreciating that sales cycles are longer than they ever have been. And we can see that through, Alex Hormozy. And I would say the other thing is understanding that we're shifting away from those cheesy techniques, and our buyers have gotten more sophisticated in the sense that they've seen it all now. Like we've seen it all. We've seen the webinars that are framed as live. We've heard all the funny word tracks and the cheesy metaphors. And if you haven't heard them, I wish you good luck in the wars to come. And I think all of that has resulted in just this deep level of skepticism. And so what can we do about it? Well, one of the things I believe that we need to focus on is we need to get back to relationship selling. We need to get back to what selling is at its core, which I believe is having a relationship with someone. So completely detaching from the need to close somebody and focusing more on this idea that the person has a problem. And the most important thing in a sales conversation is for us to understand their problem. And we'll talk about this probably in our next episode of like what actually is a sale. And if you've been listening to the playbook, and sorry, if you don't know what the playbook is, there'll be a link down below. It's $12. It's basically my life's work put into a book format. And the playbook talks about the different kinds of questions that we can use to get prospects to sell themselves to us. And if you click the link below, you'll be able to get yourself a copy. So if we get back into thinking about what can we actually do about this, it's getting back to relationship selling. Why is it so difficult for me to say? Relational selling. And essentially what that means is getting back to understanding what is the prospect actually here for. And most of the time it's understanding that they have a problem somewhere underneath the surface. And that problem is the difference between where they are now and where they expected that they would be by now. So I'll just give that like a really short caveat, as I'll cover that in more detail next episode. And so our focus should truly be on understanding with curiosity, detached from the sale, focused on the person in front of us, right? Putting this person ahead of the deal to get what is going on for them before we even pitch. And I think we've kind of lost this in the sales training at the moment, where it's all deal, close. They've left the human element out of it. They've left the heart out of the sales conversation. And I think that's one thing that will really help is I had this client that was working with personal trainer, and he was struggling to sort of close deals because he was very scripted. And I said, look, just for your next call, just drop the script. Just connect with the person, figure out what they want, where they want to go, and let's just run with that. And he made a sale after that, because he dropped the facade of pretending to be someone that he's not, or having to speak in a certain way, just detaching from that organic flow of human connection. And it's not to say that frameworks don't help. I would say, that's really important. The difference between a framework and a script is you want to sort of have these points that we want to touch on in the conversation, but you don't want that to take away from your connection with people. So look, let's wrap that up today, because I think we're probably on about 15 minutes. And if you want to tune in tomorrow, we're going to be talking about what actually is a sale, how do we create that sale, and then there'll be a few more episodes after that. We're looking at probably releasing a couple of these every week, so there should be something for you to just tune into every now and then, probably on a Tuesday and a Thursday, so you can just jump in, have a listen, and we welcome all the feedback as well. If you would like to ask some questions or anything, just drop them in the comments below, wherever you are commenting from, or you can send us an email at sales.caleblassard.com, or you can grab a copy of our playbook, which is www.caleblassard.com/playbook-V1. The link will be down below. But thank you for tuning into episode 1. I hope we can retain you to episode 2, and we'll see you in the next one.